Okay, so for completing the square in 32.4, they start you off with this, like x squared minus, I think it started off like this, x squared minus 10x plus some number equals x minus some number squared. And I don't like that they put this part over here like that. I think it would have been better if they wrote it this way and then said, oh, and you're going to eventually factor it and find out what was squared. I think would have been a better way to put it. So what you do is you take half of the middle term and you square it. And that tells you what number would go here. So half of negative 10 is negative 5. You square it, that's positive 25. So now you have x squared minus 10x plus 25. And when you factor this, it's going to be x minus 5 squared. This is the number we're going to put in there when we factor it. It's half of the middle term. So let's do a couple of problems from beginning to end. We have this one right here. The first step for completing this square, here's your 6 steps that I don't know if they're the same 6 steps anybody else would give you, but these are my 6 steps for it. Number 1 is, if needed, divide everything by the coefficient of x squared. So if the first term has anything other than a 1, you need to divide everything by that number on both sides of the equal sign. So I would divide by 3 here, and here, and here, and here. Everything gets divided by 3 so that that first term will be a 1 on the coefficient of x squared. And when you do that, this is what you end up with right here. So then the second step says, see step number 2, move the third term by removing it from both sides. So we don't want that third term there anymore. It's not a perfect square term. It's not making this a perfect square trinomial. So we're going to actually get rid of that term so that there's a blank spot there. And we have to, what we do to one side, we have to do the other. So we want to go ahead now and we have x squared minus 10x equals negative 3. And I'm going to leave that blank there. So that's kind of what they had up here when they gave you the problem. They left a blank there. Okay, so now I'm going to do that half of the middle term. So negative 10 divided by 2 equals negative 5, half of the middle term, and you're going to square it. That was our step 3 of our process. It says half of the middle term, and then square it, and then give it to both sides. Add that to both sides of the equal sign. So half of the middle term, square it, gives us a 25, so plus 25 here. And we have to do it to both sides, plus 25 here. So we have x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals 22. So then the fourth step says, now just factor this side, the left side of the equal sign. Well, when you do that factoring, it always turns out that it's going to say x, and whatever this sign was is what's going to go here. And the number that goes here is that half of the middle term. So it's 5. So this is factored, it's x minus 5 squared. And the reason we're doing that is because of step 5, where we're going to find the square root of both sides of the problem. This right side is going to be the positive and negative square root. So it's going to be x minus 5 is the square root of this right here. And then plus or minus the square root of 22. Now, I cannot reduce the square root of 22 at all. There aren't any perfect squares that make up 22. So we'll leave it in the radical like that. And then step 6 says solve for x. So that means we're going to have to get x by itself. So we're going to add 5 to both sides. And so we have x is equal to 5 plus or minus the square root of 22. That means there's two answers here. One of them is 5 plus the square root of 22, and the other one is 5 minus the square root of 22. So we'll do that again. Do one more example here. We have completing the square, and we're going to go through, here's the steps again if you want to take a screenshot of those again. This is a good time to do it. Number 1, divide all of the terms by the coefficient of x squared if needed. Okay, so we have a 3 here, so we're going to divide them all by 3. So we get x squared plus, excuse me, it's got p's in this problem. Let's try this again. I can't seem to write correctly. Okay, we have p squared plus 2p minus 5/3 equals 0. Now, the second step says get rid of the third term, so I'm going to add 5/3 to both sides because they were being subtracted, and to make it go away on that side you have to do the opposite. So now we have p squared plus 2p equals 5/3. Now we're going to take half of the middle term, so half of 2 divided by 2 is 1. And we square it. 1 squared is still 1. So we're going to add 1 to both sides. So we have p squared plus 2p plus 1 is equal to 5/3 plus 1. Well, 1 is also the same as saying 3/3, so that they have common denominators and we can add them up. So we have 8/3 on this side. The next step is to factor on the left, and it's going to be p, whatever the sign of the middle term is, and half of the middle term, squared, like that. So we have it factored on the left now. Step 5, we're going to find the square root of both sides. Square root of this side and square root of this side plus or minus on the right side. So we get p plus 1 on the left. We get plus or minus. Now we're going to think of this 8/3. We're going to think of it as the square root of 8 over the square root of 3. And the square root of 8 is actually the square root of 4 times 2. So we can actually, let's do this instead. Because we know we don't want a radical in the denominator. That's not allowed. We can do this in a couple different orders, but I think maybe it would be smarter for us to get rid of to rationalize the denominator first. Let's take this times the square root of 3 on the top and the bottom, so that we have plus or minus the square root of 24 over 3. And so then we can say p plus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 24. If you look at any numbers that are perfect squares that make 24, it's 4 times 6. So we would have 2 times the square root of 6 over 3. And then if we subtract 1 from both sides, we say p is equal to -1 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 6 over 3. Now I do know that sometimes they tell you this has to be written as common denominators. And since -1 has a denominator of 1, we would multiply both of these by 3 to get them to have a denominator of 3, so that we could then call it like that. Hope this helps you.